My name is Sophie Bennett, and I'm 32 years old. When I decided to leave my secure position at Helix Dynamics, where I had spent nearly a decade, it wasn't a reckless move. I had thought it through carefully. I wasn't just walking away from a job. I was giving up stability to chase something much more intangible, a dream. Vanguard Core, my brainchild, wasn't born from a boardroom meeting, nor did it originate from any neatly drawn-up business plan. It was planted late at night, in quiet moments when I stared at the gaps in current cybersecurity systems and asked myself, can we do better? Can we build a system that adapts, that defends itself without constant human intervention? When Orionis Technologies approached me with an offer to lead their AI team in Austin, Texas, I felt something stir inside me, an opportunity not just to work, but to bring a vision to life. The company was young, full of potential, and more importantly, they promised me the space to create freely. I believed, and I stepped forward. For the next 18 months, I poured everything into Vanguard Core. Not just my intellect, but my heart and my faith. I worked tirelessly, not out of pressure, but out of a deep hunger to see what I believed in come alive. Every line of code I wrote, every algorithm I fine-tuned, carried a piece of my soul within it. To me, Vanguard Core wasn't just a product. It was a quiet declaration that we could build something not just powerful but principled. Looking back, I understand. What we create with devotion and integrity, even when tested, even when trampled, still carries within it an unbreakable vitality. Because true value never depends on fleeting recognition. It exists in and of itself. And very early on, I chose to believe in that. At first, I believed I had found a safe place to nurture my dream. Colin Mercer, CEO of Orionis Technologies, seemed the perfect image of a startup leader. Sharp, charismatic, endlessly speaking of innovation and the hunger to build something great. In those early months, every time he stopped by the lab, it was accompanied by polished encouragements. Brilliant work, Sophie. We have high hopes for your project. The glances, the smiles, all crafted carefully to create a sense of trust. And I, with all my sincerity, believed it. I threw myself into the work like a sower scattering seeds, unafraid to pour out every last ounce of energy. Vanguard Core took shape day by day, growing from lines of code, from relentless testing, and countless sleepless nights filled with wrestling and refining. I remember the moment clearly, just 3 days before everything changed forever. The system autonomously detected and neutralized a simulated cyber attack without a single human intervention. Not only meeting expectations, Vanguard Core exceeded them. It identified vulnerabilities I hadn't even programmed it to recognize. I thought I was standing on the brink of something magnificent. Inside me, a deep, quiet pride bloomed. Not a loud, boastful pride, but the serene certainty that my effort, passion, and belief were finally bearing fruit. Which is why, when I received the unexpected meeting request from Tessa Moore, Colin's executive assistant, I had no reason to doubt. Just a progress briefing, I thought. A natural step before showcasing to the major investors. I had no idea that when I walked into that conference room, a betrayal had already been carefully laid out, as silent and deliberate as a door long locked, waiting for me to step inside. But what I want to emphasize now isn't the pain. It's the lesson. Not everyone who smiles at you wants to see you succeed. And not everything that crumbles before your eyes is an ending. Sometimes, it's just the way life sharpens your resilience, hones your instincts, and prepares you for a deeper kind of victory. One that begins from within. When I stepped into that conference room, sunlight streamed through the large glass windows, stretching across the cold, gleaming surface of the round table. Colin Mercer sat at the head of the table, and beside him was Victoria Lang, the chief legal officer of Orionis Technologies. Her presence, with a thick file in hand and a gaze devoid of emotion, immediately made my stomach tighten. "Good afternoon, Sophie," Colin began, the same polite tone as always, but now hollow, like a speech rehearsed too many times. Before we discuss Vanguard Core, there are a few contractual matters we need to clarify. I sat down, my palms cold against the smooth table, but I kept my gaze steady. I listened as Victoria read an excerpt from the contract. Clause 12.4. All products, ideas, and inventions developed during employment, using company resources, belong entirely to Orionis Technologies. I nodded slowly. I'm familiar with standard IP clauses, I said evenly. But the concept and core architecture of Vanguard Core were designed before I joined Orionis. I have recorded drafts, timestamps, preliminary copyright filings. Victoria didn't flinch. Perhaps the idea is yours, she replied, but the complete system, the commercially viable product, was developed here. Colin leaned back in his chair, the familiar half-smile playing on his lips. Let's be frank, Sophie, he said. Vanguard Core is Orionis property, but we don't want to leave you empty-handed. The company will offer you a generous bonus $250,000 once the product launches. I heard the numbers fall like cold stones. A small part of me wanted to react, to speak out, to fight back. But instead, I drew a deep breath, letting the surge of anger settle. I understood. This wasn't just about intellectual property. It was a test to see how I would respond to injustice. I looked Colin straight in the eye, past the smile of a man who thought he had stolen everything without consequence. And I smiled back light, almost careless, as if this exchange wasn't nearly enough to undo me. Starting tomorrow, Victoria announced crisply, your employment with Orionis Technologies will be terminated. Congratulations, Sophie. Congratulations? I almost laughed. If they thought ending my contract was the final move, they had forgotten something vital. I didn't just build the system. I also knew how to protect it. I rose to my feet, calmly gathering my laptop and the few personal files that remained. And I walked out of that room not as a defeated figure, but as someone who had just closed one door, ready to open another. A door I would design myself. I stepped out of the conference room, feeling as if I were swimming through a stream of ice-cold water, sharp, but strangely clear. No rage, no pain. Only a profound clarity, the clarity of someone who had seen the true nature of things and accepted it as an inevitable part of life. Tessa Moore, the executive assistant, was waiting for me in the hallway, her gaze uneasy. She handed me a small cardboard box, the standard issue for those who had been dismissed, to pack up my personal belongings. I took it with a light smile, as if nothing in this world had the weight to shake my resolve anymore. On the way back to my private office, I moved slowly, gathering my things. The computer screen was already blank. All personal files had been backed up days ago. No one at the company knew that 6 months earlier, I had seen the first signs of betrayal. One late night, while checking the internal surveillance systems, I discovered unauthorized access to my personal server. No files had been stolen, no lines of code tampered with. But that breach was enough to ignite a quiet vigilance within me. Sometimes, the greatest threats don't come from the outside, they are born within the places we once trusted most. From that day forward, I had silently embedded new layers of protection into Vanguard Core lines of code that would only activate if abnormal internal behavior was detected. I told no one. I sought no validation. I simply prepared, heeding the whisper of intuition. Not everyone deserves the fruits of your labor. And now, as they demanded I hand everything over, I knew I was ready. I closed my laptop, packed a few personal mementos, an old pen, a worn technical manual I often referenced, and placed them carefully into the box. No regret, no resentment. True security isn't clinging to what's been taken. True security is the ability to stand tall even as everything around you falls apart. Before leaving the office, I logged out of all systems, deactivated every auxiliary access point I had once established. At the security desk, my employee badge was collected. I walked out of the building into the lengthening shadows of Austin's streets. Outside, the world moved on, noisy, indifferent. Inside me, a deep stillness spread. That night, I didn't sit in anger or drown in bitterness. I ordered my favorite meal through a delivery app, played an old sitcom from my college days. I chuckled softly at the silly storylines, letting my body and mind unwind. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from grand efforts. It comes from allowing yourself to breathe, to release the weight of expectations, and to remind yourself, you are still okay. I glanced at the clock. 9:25 p.m. I knew what was coming. Right at 9:30, my phone rang. The caller ID, Tessa Moore. Her voice trembled. Colin is demanding you return to the office immediately. He says it's extremely urgent. I responded calmly. I'll prepare. Send me the pickup address. I ended the call, stood up, threw on a light jacket, and stepped outside. The Austin night sky was crystal clear, the stars glittering like tiny suspended hopes across the vast heavens. I didn't know what awaited me next. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't walking forward empty-handed. I carried with me the quiet confidence of someone who had prepared thoroughly for the worst, and for something better too. And sometimes, that is the most powerful weapon we can wield when facing the world. The black car glided silently through the empty streets, carrying me back to Orionis Technologies headquarters. The late-night air felt thick and heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the engine and the golden glow of streetlights trailing across the pavement. I entered the building this time without an employee badge, without any official title. But my steps were steady, light, as if I still belonged here, as if I had never been cast out so coldly just the morning before. Tessa Moore was waiting in the lobby, her eyes wide with poorly concealed panic. Colin is waiting for you upstairs, she whispered almost fearfully. I nodded my thanks, asking no questions. I already knew. The door to the conference room was ajar. I pushed it open gently and stepped inside. Colin Mercer sat alone at the head of the table, hair disheveled, tie hanging loose around a wrinkled shirt. The overhead lights revealed deep creases across his forehead, traces of sleepless, frantic hours. When he saw me, Colin looked like a drowning man, clutching at driftwood. Fix it, he rasped, voice hoarse with desperation. I walked slowly to the table, sat down across from him, keeping my voice soft but unyielding. Fix what, Colin? He slammed his palm against the table, sending papers flying. Vanguard Core? It's identifying the company's own systems as a threat. It's spitting out thousands of false alarms. The investors are coming tomorrow morning, and if they see the system like this, everything collapses. I watched him flail in his panic, and a quiet sorrow stirred inside me. Not for his downfall, but for yet another moment where greed and arrogance had destroyed something that could have been great. Are you sure, I asked, voice even, that the system is malfunctioning? Colin faltered, his gaze wavering. Vanguard Core was designed to detect every threat, I continued slowly, like explaining to a stubborn child. Not just from the outside, but from within. If it has identified Orionis as a risk, maybe you should ask yourself why. Colin turned pale. He knew. He understood. And in that moment, I knew I had already won. No shouting. No revenge. Just letting the truth speak for itself. Look, Colin stammered, trying to compose himself, voice slipping into a rehearsed gentleness. Maybe we were too hasty in letting you go. I think, if you came back, I could propose a new arrangement. You'll be credited as a co-creator. You'll receive equity, even a seat on the board. I tilted my head slightly, pretending to consider it, then asked lightly, You want me to fix the system in exchange for those promises? Colin nodded quickly, a desperate gambler making his last bet. I smiled not with bitterness, but with utter clarity. No promises needed, I said, reaching into my bag and placing a small USB drive onto the table. This contains the authentication patch. Vanguard Core needs to operate properly. If you want to salvage tomorrow's demo, all you need to do is use it. Colin snatched the USB drive like a starving man grabbing at bread. But before he could speak, I continued, my voice slow, deliberate, cutting through the room like a blade. My conditions are: I am officially recognized as the founder and chief architect of Vanguard Core, 50% ownership of the patent rights, a voting seat on the board of directors, and $10 million in damages for the original breach. Colin's eyes bulged, his face flushing deep red. "This is blackmail," he sputtered. I shook my head slowly, still calm. "Number, this is negotiation. And if you refuse..." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Vanguard Core will continue to classify Orionis as a security threat, and all internal violation logs that the system has been collecting over the past 6 months will be automatically sent to the investors tomorrow morning. Silence blanketed the room. Finally, Colin's head sagged, and he dragged the USB drive toward himself with a heavy, defeated hand. I stood up, slinging my bag over my shoulder, turning calmly toward the door. Behind me, I heard Colin whisper, almost bitterly, "You planned this all along, didn't you?" I turned slightly, the overhead light casting a quiet halo across my face. "No," I said softly. "I simply prepared for the day you would no longer be worthy of trust." And with that, I walked out of that room, leaving behind the broken remnants of misplaced faith, carrying with me something far greater than victory: freedom. The next morning, I stood in front of Orionis Technologies building, clutching my new employee badge, the one that now bore the titles Chief Technology Officer and Co-founder, printed boldly under my name, Sophie Bennett. The morning sun in Austin cast a soft golden light across the building's gleaming glass facade. I stood there for a few moments, breathing deeply, letting myself fully absorb this moment. Not because I needed validation from anyone, but because I wanted to etch into memory the transformation that had quietly taken place, from the one cast aside to the one reclaiming the place that had always rightfully belonged to her. As I stepped into the main hall, I caught glimpses of surprise from a few former colleagues. Some averted their eyes. Some forced awkward smiles. I didn't blame them. Change always unsettles people, especially when it forces them to confront the truth that a seemingly invincible system can be challenged and changed by a single determined individual. Colin Mercer stood at the presentation podium, his immaculate suit neatly concealing the remnants of a sleepless night. The smile on his lips remained, but I could see it no longer reached his eyes. We exchanged a brief, professional nod, no animosity, no camaraderie. Just the silent agreement between two people who had once clashed and were now rowing the same boat toward a larger goal. The demonstration began. Vanguard Core operated flawlessly, responding to every simulated cyber attack the investors threw at it, with speed, precision, and adaptability far beyond anything the market had ever witnessed. Each time the system detected and neutralized a threat, the room echoed with murmurs of astonished admiration. I stood quietly at the edge of the room, not seeking the spotlight, not needing applause. Vanguard Core itself, with its extraordinary performance, said everything I needed to say. When one prominent investor, a silver-haired man in a sharply tailored suit, asked, "What inspired the creation of this system?" I caught a flicker of hesitation in Colin's eyes. There was a brief, fleeting moment where he could have chosen to claim the glory once again. But then, as if the weight of truth had become undeniable, he slowly nodded toward me. "This," Colin said, his voice steady, "is the product of the vision and talent of Sophie Bennett, our co-founder and chief architect." All eyes turned to me. I didn't speak immediately. I simply smiled a warm, serene smile, not because of the recognition just granted, but because I knew true value does not come from acknowledgement. True value comes from believing in yourself, even when no one else does. After the demo, as the crowd dispersed, I stayed behind, sitting alone amidst the empty rows of chairs. In my hand, a notification blinked on my phone. Vanguard Core, system stable, internal threats neutralized, owner protection activated. I chuckled softly. Vanguard Core had learned to protect itself, just like I had. Maturity isn't about becoming hardened. Maturity is about learning how to keep your heart intact, even after it's been wounded. 3 months later, Vanguard Corps was deployed for the first time in a real-world setting and successfully thwarting an attack on a global banking network, an incident that, had it succeeded, could have resulted in over $340 million in damages. The news spread like wildfire. Orionis Technologies became the most talked about name in the tech world. The company's stock price soared almost overnight. And I, though appearing publicly as co-founder, chose to maintain a quiet, steady presence. Because deep down, I knew the most important things I gained on this journey were never titles, or shares, or fame. They were the unwavering knowledge that I had preserved the core of who I am, even when the whole world tried to distort it. The success of Vanguard Corps had quickly and profoundly shifted the trajectory of Orionis Technologies. We were no longer just an up-and-coming name in cybersecurity. We had become the standard. For me, the months that followed were a blend of dense meetings, global expansion plans, and quiet moments spent by the office window, watching the golden afternoon light pour over the city of Austin like liquid honey. Amidst that whirlwind of achievements, one reality remained sharply clear in my mind. Colin Mercer and I could never return to what we once were. We maintained a professional relationship strictly so. No hatred, no friendship. Only the silent understanding between two people who had once wounded each other and were now compelled to coexist for a purpose greater than themselves. In board meetings, Colin often sat across from me, his gaze cautious, his words measured to the smallest detail. I knew he was trying not just to salvage his reputation, but in some way, perhaps, to make amends for the mistakes he had made. But I also understood. Some cracks, even if mended, always leave faint gray lines beneath the surface. And I accepted that. Not with bitterness, but with a quiet gratitude. If not for that betrayal, I might never have realized that true strength doesn't lie in clinging to others' loyalty. It lies in remaining loyal to yourself, even when no one else does. Once, during a strategic meeting, while we were debating whether to grant deeper access to a third-party partner, Colin turned to me and asked, "Sophie, what's your take on this?" I met his eyes steadily, unflinching. "I believe," I answered, "we should build a system where trust isn't based on promises, but on continuous verification. Trust, but always verify." The room fell silent for a few moments. Colin slowly nodded. A gesture of acknowledgement, not just for the idea, but for the hard-earned lesson he himself had helped impart. Trust is a choice, but protecting yourself is an obligation. That principle became embedded in every design decision I made for Vanguard Corps, and in every operational policy we later crafted for Orionis. We built a cybersecurity system that wasn't just powerful, but ethical. Every update came with transparent audits, privacy safeguards, and protections for user rights, because I had learned deeply and painfully that technology, like people, is only truly great when it knows how to restrain its own power. On late nights, after the city had gone to sleep, I sometimes stayed behind at the office, bathed in the warm, golden light of my desk lamp. I would open my laptop, watching the streams of code flowing like lifeblood through Vanguard Corps, and smile to myself. Nothing and no one could take this truth from me. I had stood my ground. I had not let pain turn me bitter. I had turned wounds into wisdom and betrayal into the foundation for a stronger future. The fragile balance between Colin and me was not a reconciliation. It was a silent treaty, where both sides understood that from now on, respect would no longer be automatic, but earned daily through real actions. And I was content with that, because in the end, the greatest freedom is not making others believe in you, but no longer needing their belief to know your worth. 3 months after our first success in the market, Vanguard Corps had become the story everyone in tech was talking about. New contracts poured in. Banks, defense organizations, and even governments lined up to adopt the system. Orionis Technologies wasn't just growing, it was now positioned as one of the global leaders in cybersecurity. But for me, the greatest reward wasn't the numbers or the fame. One evening, at the company's IPO announcement gala, amidst the constant flash of cameras and the buzz of celebration, a young woman approached me. Her eyes shone with admiration and hope. "Miss Bennett," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "how did you build something as incredible as Vanguard Core? How did you keep going after being betrayed?" I looked into her eyes, so clear, so eager, and for a moment, I saw myself years ago, still believing that hard work and sincerity would always be met with fairness. I smiled, gently but firmly. "I learned," I began, "that what we build must be strong enough to protect itself, just like we must be strong enough to protect ourselves. No one can guarantee the world will treat you kindly, but you can build a foundation within yourself, so solid, that even when others try to bring you down, you can stand up again whole and unwavering." She listened intently, her gaze never leaving mine. "I once believed," I continued, my voice softening as if speaking to my younger self, "that recognition from others was everything. But I realized, true worth doesn't come from applause. It comes from refusing to abandon your principles, even when you stand alone." I told her about the long nights when I questioned whether I was naive to believe in integrity, about the moments when cold, slammed doors tempted me to react with bitterness, and the choice I made instead, to prepare quietly for the day I would rise. Not to seek revenge, but to protect what I had built with all my heart. "Weren't you scared?" she whispered. I smiled. Of course I was. Who isn't afraid when facing betrayal? But I learned, courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward even when your heart still trembles. Outside the hall, night had fully fallen. The breeze slipped in through the cracks of the grand doors, carrying the earthy scent of rain-soaked ground. A strange, peaceful feeling washed over me. I gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Remember," I said, "protect your ideas. Protect your boundaries. And above all, protect yourself. Build systems and a spirit so resilient that no one can steal them from you. That will be your greatest achievement." She nodded, her eyes glistening with something unspoken. I watched her walk away into the crowd, silently wishing for her to hold on to that inner light. The light that doesn't come from the outside, but burns quietly and fiercely from within. I stood there for a long while, amid the laughter and congratulations echoing around me. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, but I also knew this. I no longer feared closed doors, because I had learned how to build my own path. And that was something no one and nothing could ever take away from me. A year had passed since the day I walked out of the cold glass doors of Orionis Technologies, not as someone cast aside, but as someone who had chosen to rewrite her own destiny. A year since I chose self-respect over silent endurance. A year since I stopped waiting for others to recognize me and began to truly recognize myself. Today, standing on the balcony of my new office, where the sign Vanguard Core Labs proudly hangs, a company founded by me and a few trusted partners, I feel a soft, radiant light blooming within. Not the dazzling light of external success, but the light that rises quietly from within. The light of a deep understanding of my own worth. Throughout this journey, I learned a lesson that seems simple, but to truly understand it, I had to walk through pain, disappointment, and doubt. You don't need to prove anything to those who never believed in you in the first place. You only need to prove to yourself that you were always worth believing in. Once, I dreamed of building a perfect system to protect vast networks of data, but now, I understand. What matters even more is building an ethical system within. For technology, for the company, and for my own life. Vanguard Core is no longer just a piece of technology. It is a symbol of quiet resilience. A reminder that in a world full of power plays and manipulation, there are still those who choose to rise. on their own 2 feet, and guided by their conscience. Sometimes, on late afternoons, when the sunlight lingers on the windows, I sit quietly by the glass and think about the road I've traveled. I remember the young woman who once clutched her ideas like fragile handfuls of light. I remember the failures, the near surrenders, the moments of doubt when it seemed easier to believe the voices telling me to quit. But above all, I know it was those very moments, the moments of doubt, abandonment, and betrayal, that shaped the person I am today, strong without losing gentleness, resilient while still believing in kindness. If there's one message I would leave for anyone standing in the midst of loss, facing closed doors and silent corridors, it would be this: don't fear when the light outside fades, because that is when you will learn to light your own path. Not with anger, not with vengeance, but with deep maturity, true self-understanding, and an unshakable faith that true value never comes from fleeting recognition. It is born in the things you build quietly and protect fiercely with all your heart. I close my eyes for a moment, letting the last golden light of the day brush against my face. Even though the challenges ahead may be long, I am no longer afraid. Because now I know I haven't just built unbreakable systems, I have built myself. And that is the greatest achievement of all.